Your brain has been microwaved by short-form videos, so let's make tariffs simple enough for a cat. Imagine the orange one from the USA walking into a store, pointing at a Brazilian product and saying, "You're paying an extra 25% because I said so." Beautiful. Except there's a tiny problem. The Brazilian cat doesn't usually walk into the American store with a suitcase full of cash. The American importer pays the tariff, and then somebody has to deal with that higher cost. Maybe the importer eats it. Maybe the supplier cuts the price. Maybe the retailer raises the price. And sometimes, congratulations, little consumer cat, that somebody is you. That's the part nobody puts on the campaign poster. The tariff sounds like a bill sent to Brazil, but the economic bill can travel fast. And right now, the trade fight between the orange one from the USA and Brazil's sly caramel cat is a perfect demonstration of how a government can point a paw at a foreign country and still make its own household wallet feel the claws. The current U.S. measures include an additional 25% tariff on certain Brazilian goods. Then another 12% measure applies to certain imports connected to the U.S. forced labor tariff regime. For products hit by both measures, that can stack to 37.5%. Not every Brazilian product gets hit the same way, and plenty of goods are exempt. But that distinction is exactly what makes this so fun, because tariffs are not a magic button labeled "Make Brazil Pay." They're more like a giant checkout fee inserted into a supply chain. And supply chains are basically a long line of cats passing the same fish around. The fish gets more expensive every time somebody drops it. That's the basic trick. A Brazilian company sells something to an American importer. The importer has to pay the tariff when the product enters the country. That raises the importer's cost. Now the importer has a problem. Do they accept a smaller profit? Do they negotiate with the Brazilian supplier? Do they find another supplier? Or do they raise the price? There isn't one universal answer. Different businesses make different choices. But the idea that the foreign country simply receives a giant invoice from Washington and pays the whole thing is childish economics. It's like putting a 25% surcharge on a cat's food and announcing that the cat food manufacturer has been punished. Maybe. Or maybe the grocery store raises the price and your orange tabby starts screaming at you because dinner suddenly costs more. And this is where the tariff war becomes much more interesting, because the stated goal is usually protection. Protect American workers, protect American companies, pressure foreign governments, force better trade terms. Fine. But protection has a price. American companies that use imported inputs can face higher costs. Retailers can face higher costs. Manufacturers can face higher costs. And consumers can face higher prices. So you create a policy designed to pressure the Brazilian caramel cat, and then discover an American business owner staring at his spreadsheet like, "Why did my costs just explode?" Excellent. The paw has bitten its own tail. And before your attention span leaks out of your skull, hit like and follow Paws of War. Come on, you survived 30 seconds without a dancing video. That's basically economic literacy. Now, here's where the story gets nastier. Tariffs aren't just about prices, they're about leverage. The orange one from the USA wants Brazil to change behavior. Brazil's government wants the tariffs reduced. American businesses affected by the tariffs want predictability. Brazilian exporters want access to the American market, and consumers mostly want groceries that don't require a small bank loan. Everybody wants something, nobody wants the bill. That's why trade wars become political chicken. Each side is hoping the other one blinks first. The problem is that businesses don't care about patriotic speeches, they care about margins. If a company was importing something at $100 and suddenly faces a new 25% tariff, that doesn't automatically mean the final product becomes $125. The real outcome depends on the entire chain. The importer might absorb part of it, the supplier might lower its price, the retailer might raise its price. The company might switch suppliers, or it might simply stop buying the product. That's why tariffs create distortions. And distortion is economist language for, we just made the cat walk around the room wearing 2 left shoes. The market starts adapting. Companies change where they buy things. They change contracts. They redesign supply chains. They look for exemptions. They find alternatives. Sometimes they pass costs forward. Sometimes they accept lower profits. Sometimes they abandon the transaction entirely. And eventually, all those little decisions show up somewhere, in prices, in production, in jobs, in investment, in trade flows. And yes, sometimes in your grocery bill. That's the hidden part. A tariff can be politically sold as punishment for a foreign country, but economically, it's a disruption inside a network. And networks don't know how to be patriotic. They just know arithmetic. Now imagine a Brazilian exporter. He's selling a product into the American market. Suddenly his product becomes more expensive for American buyers. What happens? Maybe the American buyer keeps buying. Maybe they negotiate. Maybe they buy less. Maybe they find another supplier. That Brazilian exporter now has a problem. But the American buyer has one too, because finding a substitute isn't always free. Maybe the Brazilian supplier was cheaper. Maybe the product had the right quality. Maybe the supply was reliable. Maybe the replacement cost more, so the tariff can hurt the exporter. But it can also hurt the customer trying to replace him. That's the little economic knife hidden inside the tariff. And now the stakes get even stranger. The U.S. measures don't hit every Brazilian export equally. Brazil's own trade ministry estimates that the newer Section 301 measures affect about 23.1% of Brazilian exports to the United States based on 2024 trade data, while 52.7% remained outside those additional Section 301 tariffs and weren't otherwise hit by the cited sectoral measures. That means this isn't simply everything from Brazil now costs 37.5% more. No, it's messier. Some products face the 25% additional duty. Some face 12.5%. Some can face both. Some are exempt. And some are subject to other sector-specific tariffs. In other words, the government didn't put one giant price tag on Brazil. It built a giant bureaucratic cat maze. And businesses now have to figure out which paw goes through which hole. This matters because tariffs can create winners too. Some domestic American producers may benefit when imported products become more expensive. That's the entire point of protection. If imported Brazilian goods become less competitive, an American producer might gain market share. So it's not simply tariffs bad. That would be too easy. The real question is, who gains, who loses, and who pays the difference? Because the answer can change depending on the product. Take an American company competing against imported Brazilian goods. If the tariff makes the Brazilian product more expensive, the American company may suddenly have room to raise its own price. Good news for the American producer. Not necessarily good news for the American customer. The customer walks into the store, sees 2 products, both are more expensive, and the government says, "You're welcome." This is where political messaging gets adorable. Governments talk about tariffs as weapons, but consumers experience them as prices. Businesses experience them as costs. Importers experience them as paperwork and duties. Exporters experience them as lost competitiveness, and politicians experience them as speeches. Guess which one has to pull out the wallet? You. Yes, you. The same magnificent economic genius who thinks a tariff is something Brazil mails to Washington every month. You probably couldn't explain the difference between an import duty and a parking ticket without using the word tax. And yet here you are watching a trade war. Welcome. Now let's talk about retaliation. Because Brazil doesn't have to sit quietly while the orange one from the USA throws tariffs across the table. Brazil can challenge the measures through international trade channels. It can consider reciprocal actions. It can negotiate. And that creates another problem. If Brazil retaliates against American goods, American exporters can get hit too. Suddenly, American farmers, manufacturers, energy companies, or other exporters may discover that geopolitical theater has arrived at their own warehouse. That's when a tariff fight starts bouncing back and forth. One side raises costs, the other side responds. Businesses adjust, consumers complain, politicians blame the other side. Then everybody acts surprised that trade got more expensive. It's like two cats fighting over a fish, and somehow both cats end up paying the veterinarian. And the stupidest part? The fish is still sitting on the sauce floor. This is why trade wars are so politically useful. The pain is spread out. One company loses here, another gains there. One customer pays a little more. Another product remains untouched. One exporter gets hurt. Another domestic producer gets protected. So there is no single dramatic moment where everyone realizes, oh, we're all paying for this. Instead, the costs are scattered across millions of decisions. 5 cents here, $20 there. A factory changes suppliers. A retailer changes prices. An importer renegotiates a contract. A consumer buys something else. Nobody sees the entire chain. That's what makes it powerful. And that's also what makes it politically dangerous. Because the person who pays the tariff may not even know they're paying the tariff. They just know the receipt looks disgusting. And now we arrive at the giant supermarket receipt. The American cat looks at it. Eggs, coffee, meat, household goods, imported components, whatever else has passed through a supply chain touched by higher costs. The caramel cat from Brazil is already halfway down the street carrying his soybeans. The American cat is staring at the receipt. And somewhere in Washington, another cat is explaining that the foreign country is paying. This is where the slogan and the economics start fighting. The tariff may be designed to punish a foreign producer, but the cost can be shared across the supply chain. And when businesses pass part of that cost forward, the consumer gets the honor of participating in the geopolitical strategy. Congratulations! You are now a tiny economic soldier, armed with a debit card, and the battlefield is Costco. But there's an even bigger question. What happens if the tariff actually works? That's where things get uncomfortable. Suppose the tariffs successfully push Brazilian exporters to accept lower prices. Great. The American importer might capture some of that difference. Suppose American companies replace Brazilian suppliers. Fine. But was the replacement cheaper, better, faster, more reliable? If not, the country may have traded one problem for a more expensive one. And if the objective was political leverage, maybe the government considers that price acceptable. That's the real debate, not are tariffs good or bad? That's kindergarten. The adult question is, how much economic pain are you willing to create to achieve a political objective? And who gets to decide who absorbs that? Pain? Because governments don't experience a grocery receipt. People do, companies do, workers do, families do. The trade war might be fought between the orange one from the USA and Brazil's sly caramel cat. But the battlefield eventually reaches the checkout line. And suddenly, this isn't about Brazil anymore. It's about your money. That's the part politicians hope you don't notice. Because a tariff is wonderfully easy to explain in a speech. Foreign country gets punished. Beautiful. But the real world isn't a campaign slogan. The real world is a Brazilian exporter, an American importer, a retailer, a truck driver, a factory, a warehouse, and finally you. 7 cats, 1 fish. Everyone wants a bite. And every new tariff changes who gets the biggest piece. So here's the uncomfortable question. Would you accept a higher price if it meant forcing a foreign government to change its behavior? Or would you rather keep your cheap fish and let the diplomats fight somewhere far away? Because that's the trade-off, not some cartoon where one country pays and the other country gets free money. And the funniest part is that both governments can claim victory while the consumer gets the receipt. That's modern economic warfare. Everybody gets a flag, you get the bill, And while the big bosses fight over tariffs, trade rules, leverage, retaliation, and political points, you're counting coins to buy fish leftover flavored sachets. Your taxes fund tactical scratching posts, guided lasers to blow up street cats, and little saucers of milk for the Epstein Island elite. Then, you wag your little tail at the ballot box and elect the same parasites again. Because you are not the owner of the yard, you are the sachet. Subscribe to Paws of War before your screen-fried brain decides this video was somehow longer than a TikTok.